Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a moment. I have finally gotten most of what I needed done to the point that we can start doing some book reviews again. And so I figured I'd start us off with a bang by going with some hard science fiction. So we're starting with Onslaught, the Exile War, Book 1. But before we do, a bit of shameless self-promotion. I am currently doing a giveaway through Goodreads of Battle Games Book 1, so if you'd like to get a copy and review my own work, you are more than welcome to join that. If you do not wish to wait, however, you can grab it in both Kindle and audiobook form on Amazon, and if you're particularly picky, like I might be sometimes, you can also pick it up in paperback. I feel I'm going to be picking up more paperbacks because I'd like to fill up my bookshelves with more recent reads. Also, if you'd like to check out my other works, I will leave a link down in the description. Now, let's get back to our review of Onslaught Exile War Book 1. So I'm going to do this as I have been. We're going to start with a recap of how the story goes. Then we're going to get into what I like, what I don't like, and some of my thoughts. We begin our story with Langston Wheeler coming to the planet of Felicitas in search of a rogue telepath. He is a member of a group known as the Gentle Hands, who I will be referring to as Jedi with no lightsabers and better powers. At least that's how they seem to me. Wheeler is the black sheep of his order. He did something in the past to screw it up, and they're telling him, don't screw it up again, which is epic foreshadowing if I ever saw it. You could almost see the words written across his forehead, I'm about to repeat the same screw up I made last time, this time. One of the very first people he meets is the person in charge named Tia Den at her birthday party. And her birthday party is a big event. Because 1, she's a major influencer on the planet, 2, she's a very big celebrity, and 3, she is the chief executive of Felicitas. Felicitas is a planet that is governed by a corporation. Government works basically like this. The shareholders elect directors like you would in a company, and then the directors elect a chief executive. The chief executive is the one who makes all the major decisions, and the board and the chief executive kind of combine the functions of a president, a senate, and a congress all in one go. When Wheeler meets Tia, Tia is initially disappointed. They were expecting this big-time telepath to come there in search of this rogue telepath named Van Tremor. However, it turns out they got Wheeler instead, for reasons that we may or may not find out later. Tia's disappointment is immediately forgotten about, let's just say, because she is smitten with just how handsome Wheeler is. And the connection between these two is immediate, and I find to some degree insufferable. The two hit it off fairly well, with Tia shamelessly flirting with this psychic who she knows is not supposed to be dating anybody in front of the cameras and everybody at this party. This shameless bit of romance is immediately and gratefully broken up by a psychic battle, which takes place with fire and electricity as the rogue telepath appears, and both he and Wheeler immediately proceed to demolish the entire party, killing 15 people in the process, with Wheeler escaping with Tia. The two escape to what I believe is the center of their government, this large tower, where the directors and Tia meet with Wheeler in tow. They're all upset that all these people died, and the gentle hand Wheeler was supposed to be able to stop them from being able to do that with his special Jedi no lightsaber powers. Wheeler is less convinced of such and says they should be grateful that he was able to get out of there with Tia. At least that's how I took the interpretation. Wheeler's very soft with these people, and much softer than I myself would be. This finger-pointing and blaming is immediately interrupted by the appearance of more telepaths. It turns out these telepaths are not just rogue telepaths. They are the old enemies of the Gentle Hand named the Archons, who I find to be far more fun than the Gentle Hands themselves, and they show just how powerful they are by mind-controlling some of the executives to basically jump out of a window, which I have to say is probably one of the most horrifying ways that someone can watch another person die. Wheeler once again escapes with Tia. However, the rest of the board does not, and they are left at the tender administrations of these black-clad archons who basically say, you're going to do what we tell you, or we're going to make you kill yourselves. Be prepared, because something terrible is coming, and you're going to have to make a choice, and if you make the wrong one, terrible, terrible, terrible things are going to happen to you. Once a safe distance away, Tia tells Wheeler that, hey, I've got a way we can get to somewhere safe, and immediately calls up her ex-boyfriend, who's a hotshot pilot who drives a ship called a Jackrabbit. Now, her old boyfriend is not particularly up to doing this, but it appears that she convinces him to do it anyway, and now enters one of the coolest vehicles I think comes in this series. The Jackrabbit is a method of travel which basically involves quickly jumping to the upper atmosphere, almost orbiting the planet, and then coming down somewhere else. This is marred somewhat by every time they do this, they have to reapply the heat-resistant paint, but it's still a pretty cool way of traveling in my opinion. I really enjoy this vehicle, and Grayson, the man who is Tia's ex-boyfriend, he's basically got the same attitude that every sci-fi roguish pilot has, that he's very brash, he kind of taunts people. I don't want to call him Han Solo, but Han Solo kind of set the type, so he's just kind of the dashing roguish pilot. But he escapes with Tia and Wheeler in tow. Once in a safe location, Tia calls to one of her, I'm not sure if he's just a soldier or a director, to find out what's going on, and it turns out all the directors are still trapped in the same tower they left behind. This conversation is immediately interrupted by the new chief executive who has been elected in her stead, who is about to tell her to walk her happy butt right back to that tower, when the conversation is interrupted by a very grisly figure of a half-human, half-pig hybrid who basically says, hey, we're here, you exiled us a long time ago, we're going to take over your planet and eat you, and you're going to be happy about serving us if we don't eat you. This is thought it might be a prank at first until they look outside and see the ships incoming. And that is where I'm going to leave the recap off. I think that'll bring you to about the 25% mark of the book. It's a nice little cliffhanger, and we are going to move promptly into the things that I like. We're going to move quickly into the things that I like. First of all, this book moves along at a good pace. It's not a very long book, and though there are some parts that drag a little bit, it moves along pretty well. They aren't very long. It's easy to get through. I do like the telepath's powers. They have a wide range of powers. Each one seems to have something they specialize in, though they are familiar with the other schools. And the mind control is something I really, really like, but I'll touch on that here in a moment. However, the powers sometimes seem a little bit too big, but I do like that there's some mystery involved. It might just be that we're dealing with some accomplished telepaths, let's say. The Archons are also something that I really like. Where we're going to compare the gentle hands to the Jedi, we're also going to compare the Archons to the Sith, because if you read the book, that comparison is going to be kind of inevitable. However, they're not quite as rigid as the Sith. They do have this odd thing where death and suffering to them is kind of like a drug. They really enjoy it, and it makes them, I believe, a fairly good villain. The Archons, again like the Sith, determine who rules by who's stronger. However, unlike the Sith, their matches to determine who is stronger are much shorter. It's a very short psychic battle. It seems to be whose will can dominate the other one, and the one who dominates the others is simply the ruler. Nobody can question them, and they can have as many people working under them as they want. They also subscribe to the powers of mind control. It's one of the things that makes them such a threat. And it's mentioned in the book that they were able to mind control entire planets on an almost industrial scale, which I think makes them a very good threat. And naturally, there's a lot of animosity between them because they rule through power and fear, and this is portrayed very well between the interactions between the character named August, who's kind of the lesser in this, and the ruler, who is the top dominant Archon, who was first revealed in the fight between Wheeler and him at Tia's birthday party. They also practice a lot of deception, though there is some caveats to that. You'll have to read the book to find out about it. I'm not going to explain it. It's worth reading the book for that. It's not a very long book. Furthermore, I'd like to say I really appreciate any sci-fi and fantasy series that has a good naming scheme, with names you can remember that aren't very confusing. The people's names are fairly easy to remember. I had almost no trouble telling the people apart. The names said a little bit of something about them. When they talked about these people, I could instantly picture them in my head. It's a good system. I also like that they have titles and that they are called by their titles. The people who work in the corporations are referred to as director and executive. The gentle hand himself is referred to as a gentle hand, or by the title that the corporation seems fit. I like it. It adds to the world. I also like that later in the story we're introduced to the Decacopter, which the name instantly tells you what it is. It sounds big and scary because it is big and scary. I like that a lot. I also enjoy the fact that the powers in this cause environmental damage. So many fantasy and sci-fi stories that I've read, fire and lightning get thrown around, huge waves get tossed about, and nothing happens. Everything's just fine. No, in this, they are literally just trashing every area they choose to fight in. I like that a lot. Next, we have the Hogmen. The Hogmen, they're about 10 feet tall. They're human-hog hybrids. They're gross. They're a threat. They eat people. They're a good foot soldier. They're the foot soldiers of the Archons. They do feel like a threat, so I like them. They're simple. There's no real... You have no conflict about killing them. They basically rip people in half and eat them. They make a good enemy. And the final thing I really liked about the story was the end of the story was not some pulled out of their butt Deus Ex Machina thing that you're like, oh no, these two people saved an entire world. It's like, no. It actually has some pretty decent resolution. Not the greatest that I've seen, but I was fairly satisfied with the ending, and if you can satisfy me with the ending, you're doing a good job. Let's get into the things I didn't like. The romance is really heavy-handed in this story. The flirting between Tia and Wheeler is fairly distracting. Unfortunately, it's also very central to the plot, so it just can't be taken away. Tia herself doesn't seem to have much regard for Wheeler's position, and that will lead me to my second biggest gripe, which is Tia herself. She's not perfect. She's not 100% boss girl, but I feel everything is just a little bit too easy for her. From combat to popularity to people even questioning her rules or orders, it doesn't feel like she's had to suffer enough. And maybe it's because the book is so short. Things move swiftly from one scene to the other, but I just can't bring myself to like Tia. Now, this is a fairly petty complaint in what is an otherwise fairly entertaining story. It's one of the few niggles that I have about this story. I just don't like Tia as a character. Wheeler has some moments where I don't like him, but I can feel generally sympathetic to him. He's got a real problem. It's the sense of his own community and trying to belong to his community which drives him. He's a very honorable guy, and he's trying to prove how honorable he is. I can understand Wheeler's story. Tia I don't want to call her spoiled. I don't want to say everything comes too easy to her, but it feels like a lot of stuff comes way too easy to her. So lastly, let's get into my thoughts. The conflict between the Gentle Hands and the Archons does feel very Jedi and Sith. That's not to take away from the story. This kind of thing has just become ubiquitous in our history. You see it in a lot of sci-fi. Sometimes it can be a bit much, but I feel in this it was done pretty well. I would like to see some middle ground because the telepaths just seem to break down into either Archons or Gentle Hands or the occasional rogue telepath. The Gentle Hands handle the rogue telepaths by first offering them a chance to join them, and if not, they kill them. It's very Jedi. The Gentle Hands also are kind of odd to me. So they selectively breed their own. Children born within the Gentle Hands are... It sounds a lot like inbreeding, but it is possible their population is large enough that that's not a problem, and the introduction of new telepaths might prevent from that. But they've also got this weird exact replacement rule where each telepath is only allowed 2 children. However, a problem arises later on where a female telepath has already had 2 children, and she's having her husband died, and she's having an affair with a male telepath who's had no children. And by their rules, the 2 cannot get married because the woman has already had 2 children. You're going to lose a certain number of people to attrition, no matter what. Allowing these 2 to get married and have 2 more children would probably help you with the attrition. I don't understand why that's a problem, but it also plays into the fact that the Gentle Hand have become a bit too rigid, a bit too stale. It's an odd thought. I can't make it a complaint because it does work with the world building. Also, the telepaths feel very overpowered. However, that's counterbalanced by the fact they seem to be rare. However, it'd be nice to see them a bit more subtle, having to work, basically not being on the level that I'm seeing in this book. However, that might be something for later books. It's a small niggle. The book's very fast-paced, so you don't have a lot to really compare it to. It doesn't become too big of an issue. And again, and most of my complaints are very little problems. I'm not going to say the book was the best book I've ever read, but it certainly kept me entertained. I was able to get through it all in one setting. At no point did I dislike anything enough to stop listening. It's a very enjoyable book, and I think that there are people out there who really like sci-fi who are probably going to enjoy this book. And with saying all of that, I'm going to wish you all good luck. Thank you for listening to my review. If you have any books that you would like to hear my take on, please leave them in the description. I do tend to favor indie authors over conventionally published, but I will read whatever I find interesting or whatever captures my fancy. If you would like to read, review, or criticize my own works, I will include a link in the description. Also, please keep the comments civil in the comments section. Also, if you enjoy what I do, please consider giving this video a like, sharing my work, or subscribing to my channel. Thank you.